So we are going to start with Norah Eddy, who is the Associate Director for the Nature Conservancy's Oceans Program, and she's based in California. So Norah, I will let you take it away.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much. Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here as we transition our lives to staring at our screens all day. I'm sure you guys are all busy doing that, just like I am. I am actually based in Santa Barbara, California, where it's like 85 degrees for the second time this week. So that's a little bit crazy working from home, but adjusting just fine. So what I'll do is just kind of start by giving an overview of kind of how I got started in working in the marine field, and then just share a little bit about the work that I do now today at the Nature Conservancy. So I grew up in a small fishing and farming town in New England, and I just kind of always was pulled towards the ocean. So I started out with this big passion for the sea and a deep connection to fisheries and working waterfronts. I grew up with a lot of fishing families and actually lived right on the waterfront, so got to see that kind of happening real time. And I knew from a young age that I wanted to work on anything to do with oceans and the fish in it. And so with that kind of as my guiding North Star, I set out to earn a degree in marine biology. I actually went to the College of Charleston in South Carolina. And then, you know, as I was a student, an undergraduate, I did just about every internship imaginable, working at aquariums, for the Department of Natural Resources, as a habitat restoration diver, seafloor mapper, and everything, just, you know, trying to get an understanding of exactly what I was good at and where I wanted to be. And the first step that I took in my career was actually as a field biologist working aboard commercial fishing vessels in Kodiak and Dutch Harbor, Alaska. So many of you might, or some of you might be familiar with the Fisheries Observer Program that collects all the data that provides the inputs to manage our fisheries across the country. And so I love this work. I love being at sea. I love doing manual labor and working side by side with fishermen, but I recognized that I needed to use my brain a little bit more, and that there was just this real need for interdisciplinary approaches to be applied to fisheries management. And so I went to the Bren School, which is the Environmental Science and Management School at University of California, Santa Barbara, to earn my master's degree. And there at Bren, I studied coastal marine resource management, but I also took classes in entrepreneurship. So the Bren School has this cool eco-entrepreneurship program, they call it, and it's basically geared at finding a business model that solves both a customer and an environmental problem, which is kind of a rare thing to be able to do. And it was during my time at the Bren School that I, as a graduate student, that I really discovered and fully came to understand the power of market-based solutions. I was working on my master's thesis in developing innovative management strategies for the lobster fishery in Galapagos, and kind of thinking through how to apply market-based solutions in that context. And really out of my interest in both entrepreneurship and fisheries and oceans, I eventually developed this business model and launched a sustainable seafood company after graduation. So I had, you know, been following this pathway of working in the marine science field and building a career around potentially becoming a marine resource manager, and then kind of pivoted completely and became a business owner and founder of a startup. Went through the whole like California startup rigmarole, raised a bunch of money, launched our business, grew it to a nationwide distributed product and brand. And I actually sold that company after running it for about 5 years. I sold it in early 2018. And so kind of taking stock in that moment after I sold the company, just kind of thinking about the skill set that I developed through my more traditional schooling and my graduate program experience, and then, you know, kind of pairing that with this really intense and unique experience as a startup founder and entrepreneur, I really wanted to find an opportunity where I could leverage that hard-won experience, hard-earned experience, to continue advancing my personal objectives around making a positive impact on our global oceans. And that actually led me to TNC, to where I am today, to work with our awesome Oceans Program team. I knew that I wanted to be able to, apply my strengths and the things that I had learned, but I also really wanted to expand my horizons and work with a team that was a lot smarter than me. And I think that is exactly what I found at the Nature Conservancy. And so in my current role, I lead a body of work, a fairly new initiative at the Conservancy that aims to develop innovative solutions to kelp declines across the state of California, and with a lens towards scaling those solutions to this global issue of kelp declines around the world. And so my current role allows me to basically operate as an entrepreneur within the confines of the Nature Conservancy. So I don't have to worry about keeping the lights on like I did in my former role. I'm allowed to just kind of be a big thinker and get things done, get the work done to advance this conservation objective. And so I've kind of been tasked with building the business plan and strategy for kelp conservation and restoration. And as part of that work, I work closely with scientists like Jen Cassell, resource managers at the Department of Fish and Wildlife. I work with a number of stakeholders, including fishermen, community groups, and others, to help inform these solutions in kind of harnessing that interdisciplinary approach that I referenced earlier. And so really, I think my role at the Nature Conservancy is a really great way for me to take full advantage of this skill set that I've developed, work with this amazing and impactful team, and develop professionally. So just kind of in closing, I would very much encourage you all. I think that my path has not been linear by any means. It's not like a traditional academic trajectory. It was nothing that I could never have anticipated as an undergraduate student, that this is where I would be today, and that I would have kind of transitioned from being a founder and entrepreneur into this work in conservation. But it's incredibly gratifying. I love the work that I'm doing. I wouldn't trade that path and all the bumps in the road for anything. So I just would encourage you all to keep an open mind as to what your career might look like, and to let your passions and interests really be that North Star for you, and just take advantage of every opportunity that comes your way. So I look forward to hearing more from you all in questions, and I'm an open book, so don't hold back when the time comes.
Great, thank you so much, Nora. I think it's true that all of our career paths are these very windy pathways, and often you don't realize that when you're just starting out, so it's great to have that perspective. All right, moving on to our next panelist, we have Jonathan Fisher, and he's currently a science officer at the Pew Charitable Trust, but he has a background in a lot of other things that I'll let him tell you about as well.
Sure, thanks. So I also have a pretty non-directed career. Whenever people ask me for career advice, I said it's sort of irrelevant what I did. So I was at the University of Illinois doing forestry and ecology in undergrad, got sort of dual degrees, but I basically couldn't find a job locally and wanted to stay in town. So I was literally looking at retail jobs when I had a professor who gives oral final exams and asked me, hey, have you thought about grad school? And I was like, no, I don't really want to go. And he's like, well, I got money. I'll pay you, about what you're going to get anyway. So you might as well go get a stream ecology engineering master's degree. So I did that. It was sort of an atypical grad school experience. I was doing research, but it was also more like work. It was kind of a predefined body of work around trying to reduce airplane bird strikes. So it was a mix of a lot of spatial stuff, some mobile data collection, GIS, remote sensing, developing novel real-time bird radar, understanding ecology and thinking about interventions. It was a pretty strange place to be. Did that for a couple of years. Looked for a long time for other jobs in conservation and just couldn't find one. Or when I did find one, my boss / advisor would freak out because he felt like he needed 3 months notice to find someone else to keep the work going. So eventually I just put in notice without having any other job. So at the end of August, I'm going to leave. And after about 2 weeks of sleeping on couches, I got a job with Nature Conservancy, so that worked out pretty well. I was there for 13 years. It was about half and half doing more spatial stuff, so spatial, building a spatial data infrastructure for the organization as part of measures work. Like we couldn't actually show where we owned land, where we're doing planning, eco-regional priorities for protection, so kind of helping to build that data infrastructure, and then about halfway through switched to be doing more of a science role and more sustainable agriculture as a focus, just because there wasn't anyone else doing that. And that was, I guess, kind of one of the key things I learned is a lot of staying employed at a nonprofit, especially in central teams, is being adaptable. And as the needs change, you just sort of reinvent yourself and learn new things. And it's kind of trying to find ways to make what you already know relevant. So as I was moving to research, taking the spatial background and applying that to more remote sensing research. So it's more science than data analysis or data management, but it's still drawing on the same skills. I guess I should have mentioned I also worked at the Forest Service for a few years on and off, part-time in high school and college. So I've done both government, academic, and NGO. And yeah, so I worked on a lot of things at TNC, corporate sustainability, climate change, kind of all over the place, super broad. And then after 13 years at TNC, decided it was time for a change. So I joined the Pew Charitable Trusts. Pew's a funny beast. It used to be a foundation and now they're an NGO. They did switch up 15 years ago. But the conservation work is about 90% marine, and there's still just a bit on land and on fresh water. So they hired me to literally be the everything else scientist. I think my title is like land and water science officer, so it really narrows it down. So they wanted somebody who could kind of speak to remote sensing and terrestrial ecology and freshwater ecology and a variety of other things. So it's been fun kind of inventing my own job because it didn't exist before, but I think in general I have kind of like a few different things I do. One is on sort of informing research. So when people are doing research, it's kind of working with them on finding the right researcher, what are the right research questions, how should it be designed, how do we maximize the impact of the research, just really thinking through it from start to finish. Also kind of just providing scientific advice and expertise. What does the latest literature say, sending on relevant papers, giving tips for what the evidence does and doesn't say. And there's been a whole other bit kind of around research impact. So actually helping to ensure that, so kind of related to the research design piece, but just more broadly, how do we think about research application, doing strategic planning and theories of change. I actually got a new paper that was just accepted Sunday that's kind of tips for scientists on how to improve their own impact, which is basically built on the backs of our failures and some successes as authors over the last, a couple decades of collective experience we have. So that's kind of one of the things I've been doing, is just finding ways to help make sure that science we produce actually gets used and put into practice and not wasted because either nobody knows about it or it was too much science or not enough science. So I'll leave it there.
Great, thanks, John. All right. Next up, we have Karen Gehrts. She is the lead for the California Department of Water Resources Office of Water Quality and Estuarine Ecology. So that's a lot of ecology and science stuff in there. So I'll let you describe what you do.
Actually, before I start, I really want to see John's publication. I'm very interested in that sort of stuff too. So I would love to get a copy of it. My background, kind of similar to Nora's, started at a very young age. I have the honor of having a twin sister who I had to share a room with. We didn't always get along, and there was a creek in the back, and I just would escape and play, turn over rocks, play in the mud, figure out how the water sort of flowed around. And that was ultimately the thing that made me the most happy, just sort of growing up and all the trials and tribulations of that. And when I started school and really thinking about what I wanted to do, I thought, gosh, science and water sounds great. But then every new class that I took was this engaging, exciting, awesome new thing. And so it was, zoology or entomology or botany, and everything just seemed so amazing. And so by the time I ended up graduated, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to go do all of it. And so it really, I spent some time thinking about where I could be the most useful. And ultimately, I thought that it was policy and politics. I So I did an internship in Washington, D.C., where I quickly realized that politics wasn't for me at that time in my life. And, you know, now that I'm older, I'm circling back to it. But at that time, it wasn't great. So I want to echo to what Nora said about finding opportunities and taking every chance that you can, because for me, ultimately, taking every chance that I could landed me at my dream job. And for me, and I'll say my dream job, I've had multiple dream jobs, and they've changed every time that you change too. But the first time that I got my dream job was as a very low technician who just went out on a boat and got to do benthic core samples. And for me to realize that benthic work and being in the water was something circling all the way back to when I was a kid was kind of magical. And so I spent 10 years doing research in the San Francisco estuary and Delta. Ultimately, that was my graduate work too. And then circling back to, you know, where I could have the most impact and what applied science was necessary in order to move our society forward. Ultimately taking a little bit more of a management track. And so now I manage the Office of Water Quality and Estuarine Ecology. I have a team of about 65 scientists. They are amazing and awe-inspiring, and every time I walk into a room, I feel like the stupidest person, which is an amazing feeling. And yeah, that's about it. Just pay attention to the pathway and be open to whatever may come your way.
Thanks, Karen. That's great. I love that idea that there's no one dream job, right? It changes as you go through your path. And
I think I've had 3.
Yeah. So it's important to try different jobs and roles. So thank you. All right. Let's move on to Geoff Herrick. He's currently a soil scientist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Agricultural Research Service in New Mexico.
Great, thanks, Kristen. So I have actually had at least 3, if not 5 dream jobs, all working out of the Jornada in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And I arrived at the Jornada in part because there was an LTER there. And my LTER connections actually go all the way back to, as an undergrad, with my work-study jobs working on Niwot Ridge. Just up the hill, I can almost see it from where I'm now sitting back in Boulder, Colorado. And I think my career evolution has really been about circles, and starting off as an undergrad at Swarthmore College and thinking I wanted to save the world, and thinking that to do that I had to do policy and I had to do management and I had to do basic research and I had to be smart and all these things. And when I got done at Swarthmore, I felt like I didn't know what to do. And so I basically started looking for opportunities to at least learn about something that made a difference in the world, and that turned out to be soils. And so I ended up with a PhD in soil science, but still sort of had this pretty narrow vision about what that was going to allow me to do. And I decided restoration was what it was. And so I ended up at the Jornada. A job opened up and I was so excited. I was going to be a soil scientist. I was going to get to do restoration. And the guy that basically said, yeah, I think we can select you for this position, but we want you to do monitoring and evaluation. And so I spent the next 10 years working with a wide variety of federal agencies trying to develop consensus on what standardized monitoring protocols should be and how they might adopt them. And through that process, did a lot of research to support the development of those protocols that were eventually adopted. And now we do have a set of national rangeland monitoring and assessment protocols that there's a database with 60,000 plots. NRCS, BLM continue to use these protocols and so forth. But that's not really what I wanted to do. What I really wanted to do was engage at the science policy management interface. So I started taking opportunities and looking for opportunities to engage with different organizations, giving talks, being willing to participate in workshops, using basically that extra time beyond the 40 or 50 hours a week that it takes to just keep up with our are basic jobs. And so I ended up volunteering with the State Department, and eventually ended up as the lead science negotiator for the UNCCD, the Desertification Convention. So very similar kinds of things to what is done on the climate change negotiations, but a much smaller team. It's basically me and maybe one other person on the science side, and then I end up having to cover some of the policy issues as well. That actually led to connections that then put me on the International Resource Panel. And this is one of the resources I'd point you to if you are interested in this realm. So the International Resource Panel is like the IPCC, but deals with sustainable consumption and production issues. And so I lead the work on land there. And so instead of just focusing on a climate lens, we actually focus on all the lenses, do a lot of life cycle analysis and so forth. And if you're interested in exploring these, the reports that are there, the one that we just published on land restoration and co-benefits for the Sustainable Development Goals is one that you might want to take a look at, just to kind of see the different ways that we can apply our science. What I'm spending most of my time on, though, now is the development of a mobile app. And so I was intrigued by Nora's career path because I'm ending up where she started, with a startup. The startup is effectively within U.S. government, and I will never make any money off of it. But effectively the same process of trying to keep the lights on, trying to figure out where that sweet spot is in terms of who the customer base is, trying to develop something that works for lots of people at once, but also specific segments of the population, and then developing business plans. And so if you're interested in that, go to landpotential.org or download the Land PKS app, LAND PKS app. And it's a tool that you can use in your garden to identify your soil. It's actually very relevant to research. A lot of folks are using for research now as well. But a completely different thing. And I think what it shows is that there is an incredible amount of flexibility to do really creative stuff in federal government science positions, whether it's with USGS or ARS or DOE. If you're willing to be entrepreneurial, and if you're willing to do things that you didn't originally sign up for. So if you want to, my position is structured very similarly, and it's rewarded very similarly to an academic position where I don't have any formal teaching responsibilities, but I actually end up doing a huge amount of teaching. The difference between this and an academic position is it puts you in a position where there's a higher probability of impact, but less flexibility. If I knew anything about viruses, I can tell you right now, I would be working on COVID. And the federal government has the right, as my employer, to tell me to work on something else. However, there's also the flexibility to say, okay, well, there's clearly a demand for this in the customer base. I've got time available now. I'm gonna start shifting my focus there. The last thing that I'll just mention is that tease off of that, I think, is it's really important for finding a good fit for your job is to prioritize whether you want to be recognized for being a smart scientist. And if that's really important to you, definitely go for academia, publish in the highest quality journals, and promote the heck out of yourself on ResearchGate. Or do you want to have lots of freedom to do the research that interests you most? Again, probably academia, but there are other places that you can do that. And some people do a pretty good job of working off of soft money on their own doing that. Do you want to make a good living? Again, that makes a fairly good difference. Or do you really want to make a difference? And are you willing to sacrifice the glory, the power, and, in some cases, although not in a federal government position, the stability of the salary? So anyway, again, happy to visit with anybody, answer additional questions, and thanks for pulling us all together, Kristen.
Of course, thank you so much for that perspective and the resources you mentioned as well. And I think it's important to remember that, that job description that you read does not encompass everything that you might be able to do in that position. You can grow and evolve in a position, as well as what you do after grad school and what you're necessarily going to do forever. So it's really nice to hear all of that. All right, next on the list we have Alex Navarro, and he is a conservation and outreach manager with the Nature Conservancy in New York. So I'll let you get into it.
Thanks. So yeah, I've always had a very windy, unclear path. From the time I was a kid, I was not the type of person who knew what I wanted to be or even knew that a scientist was a thing I could be. I never knew anybody with a PhD until I went to undergrad, but I'm going to skip most of that and just start from really, I got a bachelor's degree in environmental science at a state university in New York called Brockport, really small program, spent a lot of time in the field. And while I was there, I really learned that conservation biology was the only thing I had ever had so much interest in that I would wake up at 8 a.m. to go to class for. So it was something that I knew I wanted to do. I fell in love with amphibians and reptiles in particular, and also trying to understand how animals, particularly amphibians, would respond to our changing climate. So I didn't get into grad school right away. Took a year and worked at Walt Disney World in their animal sciences program. While I was there, I had only ever thought I could go on to get a master's. I didn't think like I was PhD material or even knew what that was. But I realized I really wanted my boss's job. He was the head vet and researcher in the animal sciences program at Disney. So I knew I had to at least get a PhD to do what he did. I wanted to be in charge. I wanted to be the manager, not necessarily the one doing the data collection. So I ended up going to University of Maryland to get my PhD. Really went there, again, wanting to be a conservation biologist, but very quickly started down a path towards a little bit more like conceptual research. So I was looking at adaptations that might allow individuals and populations of amphibians to respond to climate change. So I kept going more and more into like animal physiology. My career path looked like it was totally going towards academia. I did not want that. I really wanted to do applied conservation. And so one thing I did in grad school to keep my foot in that conservation door and prevent opportunities from closing was to volunteer for a national conservation organization called Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation. So I worked with them for about 5 years, first as an intern, and now I'm the national co-chair of the organization. That's a volunteer position separate from my job. But so that, I will say, was the one thing, when I interviewed for my current job, most of what I talked about was my work with that organization. I barely even talked about what I did in grad school. They just knew that I had a PhD, and that was it. They didn't really ask at all about my dissertation, nor did they have any interest in it. So disheartening for me at the time, but I was really glad to have kept the door open for a conservation job. So being able to tell them that I'd networked across different organizations and agencies was much more important to me landing this position than the fact that I had a couple of publications. So maybe not your typical answer for academic job search. But after I got my PhD, before I started the current job, I actually was a visiting professor at Swarthmore College for a year. Loved that job, loved teaching. It was through a program called the Consortium for Faculty Diversity Postdoctoral Fellowships. So if you're interested in pursuing a postdoc that's like half teaching, half research, that's a really good program to look into. Excellent placement. I learned so much about what it really means to be a professor and teach. Swarthmore is very dedicated to teaching, so spent many hours putting together a curriculum for that. So while I was there, I realized I don't want to be a professor. I want to get back to conservation. So I started looking for jobs, found the opening for the position I'm currently in. When I found it, it's research, teaching and outreach, and stewardship, so like getting out and using a chainsaw. I kind of felt like it was a fake job ad because it was everything I wanted to do and thought I couldn't get in a single job. Applied, ended up getting it, and so my current position is with the Nature Conservancy in New York. And I'm a manager. I do much less science now. What I do is manage. I manage people, I manage projects, and I manage the land. So I'm a manager at a preserve. It's a 2,000-acre preserve. We get about 30,000 visitors a year. This is considered like a flagship preserve. It's a Mashomack Preserve on Shelter Island in New York. So the flagship preserve is like, we take a lot of people like donors out here. This is where we bring people out into nature to show them, look what we can do to protect the world. Like, this is a great place. We can have more of this if we, care about the environment. So being a flagship preserve, being on a flagship preserve really gives me the opportunity to keep teaching and keep leading programs and doing a lot of outreach while also managing all of the research on site and just the basic preserve maintenance and stewardship activities. So on a daily basis, I could be taking a Girl Scout troop out into the field to put out a bench that they just built. I could be working with Cornell researchers trying to solve tick-borne disease issues. Or I could be working with town politicians trying to help solve our water quality problem. So every day is a new thing. I'm always have to learn something new. Like, I have to be a grassland expert, then a tick expert. It's, as I think everyone else has noted here, like, I'm never the smartest person in the room, and I always have a lot to learn. So I find that very exciting and really different from when I was the person who knew the absolute most about one salamander species and how it would respond to climate change. So yeah, I'm also an open book and happy to talk to anybody after this session or beyond about what it's like to be working on a preserve.
Great, thank you, Alex. That's awesome. Yeah, I think oftentimes the skills that we get when we're doing our graduate degree aren't the skills that we expect to help us might not be the ones that actually help us in our future career, right? There's some of those other things that we do, such as teaching, that end up pushing us down the path. So it's really cool to hear all of these varieties of paths. So we have one more panelist to go before we move into Q&A, and we've already got a lot of questions lining up, so thank you guys. So our final panelist is Jacob Zwar, and he is a Mendenhall postdoctoral fellow in the data science branch of the U.S. Geological Survey. So let's hear some more.
Thank you, and thanks for putting this panel together. It's been very great hearing all the different pathways, and I wish I had something like this during my grad school career. But I'll start out early in my life. I was always interested in the outdoors, particularly in fishing. My parents had a small pond on their property, and I would spend hours out there every day, just looking and observing the fish or catching fish and stuff. And that was pretty much my life early on. I was also, good at science and math. And in high school and early college, I think the only two jobs that I knew that I could apply those skills to were like either engineering or medicine. And so I started off undergrad in a pre-med position. I ended up getting a job drawing blood from people for lab diagnostic tests, which I absolutely hated. And that kind of told me that a medical career wasn't for me. Luckily, I had a professor in my undergrad that encouraged me to do some more research, especially ecological research. And I got a position in my undergrad institution working on fish for an entire summer. And part of that job was fishing 2 hours a day, doing a creel survey. And I couldn't imagine getting paid to go fishing. So I was like, okay, yes, I'm going to be looking into more grad school opportunities, because if you can get paid to do something like this is a pretty cool career choice. By happenstance, another professor said I should apply to this program for the University of Notre Dame Environmental Research Center. I applied and got in, and that's where I met my grad school advisor. And I went to grad school at University of Notre Dame, working on lake ecology. And I'd say early on in my grad school career, I was mostly a field ecologist, spending 3 or 4 summers up at the University of Notre Dame Environmental Research Center, taking out samples of lakes and processing them in the lab. Towards the end of my career at Notre Dame, I moved more into modeling skills. So doing some broad scale lake modeling, modeling thousands of lakes at a time. And that kind of led into my current position, where I wrote a fellowship and got funded to work at the USGS. in the data science branch, kind of expanding some of that modeling work, both into lakes and climate change and how lakes respond to climate change. So in the data science branch, which was originally I was stationed in Madison, Wisconsin. Again, I did a lot more modeling work. I also got exposed to a lot of different data science techniques, and I think if I were to have any advice for current grad students, it's like, yeah, what a lot of other people have already said is that you'll be surprised at how your skills can transition to something that you wouldn't expect they would be applied to. So when I first started my position at USGS, it was like starting like my first year of grad school. Like everybody's smarter than you, and they have all these different skills. These in particular were a lot of computer science skills that I didn't know anything about. But you know, going through grad school, you are trained to pick up on these skills, and so you know, after a few months, you feel more comfortable in the position that you're in. Currently, I work mostly on streams and modeling stream temperature and creating forecasts of stream temperature, and that's going to be in support of people who make management decisions in when to release water from reservoirs, because these reservoirs in particular support a lot of drinking water for like New York City, for example, but they have to weigh those with keeping downstream stream temperature cool enough so that they maintain a habitat for endangered species. So my current position is mostly research focused, modeling focused, but our branch does, I guess, probably 3 different activities. Research, which is what I'm mostly involved in, some analytics, and so the USGS has a bunch of different tools that people use, a bunch of different websites, and so there's part of our branch that does a bunch of different analytics on how much these tools get used, who uses these tools, etc. Then there's also a data visualization portion that I was involved with a little bit earlier on in my position, but less so now. And that's mostly for changing or creating visualizations, especially of water topics that are meant to inform the public. And so we'll create one example is hurricanes that will come through. They create floods and raise the river discharge and stuff like that. And we'll create like a GIF of how the hurricane path influences river discharge. And that will get posted on Twitter and Reddit, etc. And teach the public that, oh, actually a lot of the flooding happens a couple of days after a hurricane comes through because these rivers are rising. Yeah, and that's kind of my current path. I'm still a postdoc, and so I'm still looking for a permanent job, but hopefully it's going to continue with the USGS in my current data science branch. And I think that's it.
Great, thank you so much. And it's awesome hearing from all of you at different stages of your careers as well as different career paths. We have plenty of questions lined up, so I'm going to let Jen kick us off. We've got some that were upvoted by a lot of you, so we'll just start going through those, and I'll let Jen take it away.
Thanks. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Thank you so much to the panelists. Such interesting, and there's so many similarities in some of your career paths and really key differences. We have a bunch of questions rolling in. And although I said I wasn't going to do this in the beginning, I was going to try to direct a question just to 1 or 2 of you. Some of these first questions have been upvoted by so many people that I really think it would be interesting if you all could just do a short answer to these first set of questions. So the first question is, and I think it is pertinent to each of you, and we'll go in turn and you can give a short answer. The question is, in each of your organizations, what is the difference between employees who hold PhDs versus people who hold masters? In other words, what kind of ceilings can we expect to hit without pursuing a PhD? And I think this is a really common question that students mull over in this time of even going after different programs, masters or PhD, do I really need it, and so forth. So Karen, do you want to take that, and then we'll just move through the group. You can all just after Karen, you can unmute yourselves and give a quick answer to that. Thank you.
Sure. So in my group, we do most of the research and monitoring and synthesis. So we have a lot of PhDs. There are other teams that do less research, and they're dominated by folks with bachelor's and master's. That being said, I will say that some of my most reliable and productive employees have masters. So I think it really just circles back to, and I'm gonna point to Geoff. He's in my bottom corner here. What he said about what you want to do with your life and how you want to direct it, and where you want the most impact. If you want the most impact and you're most comfortable doing research, you should seriously consider that PhD. It will be difficult for you to get a job and to compete and get interviews and things like that without having that more research background, the PhD, the publications to really give your work the credit and trust so that managers utilize that information. If you want to do a mixture of research and policy, a master's degree is great for that. So I think it just depends. In specifically though, in my group, it's probably about a 50-50 split between PhDs and masters. There are a few folks who have bachelor's degrees and who have done very well. Most of their work though is centered on the monitoring and the more kind of technical logistical work that goes with the monitoring as opposed to the research. And that's all.
Thank you, Karen. Let's pose that question to Geoff now as a person working at the federal level, and then we'll ask some of our NGO folks the same question. And panelists, you can read the questions, right? I want to make sure you can see them. So we're on that first one that was posed by Nicole Keller and upvoted by 45 people.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to reiterate, I am with the state of California, so I am a government entity as well.
That's right. Thank you, Karen. That's why I went to you, and I knew you're in a state agency. And now let's hear from some who are in the feds, and then we'll move into the NGO folks.
So in ARS, it's somewhat dependent on which research unit you're in and how much flexibility there is within that unit. So the rules, there are some hard ceilings in terms of salary if you don't have a PhD. There are also some rules that seem to be a lot less hard in terms of flexibility and how much you can actually do. But if you want to develop, if you want the leadership that Alex was talking about earlier, you definitely want to be able to you need to have a PhD in these federal government positions. Having said that, a sister agency or brother agency, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which is more the outreach end, does have positions that do not necessarily require a PhD. And in fact, one of my mentors, Arlene Toole, was a soil scientist with NRCS, and she did some phenomenal research that had a huge impact. We talk about soil health today, soil quality is what we were talking about in the 90s, and she was one of the probably top 5 thinkers in the United States about soil quality. And she had a bachelor's. And she was able to sort of work her way through the system. It wasn't easy, but get into a position where she could take that creativity, knowledge, and wisdom and really make a difference with it. So I think having a PhD, as you know, everybody talks about, it's a ticket. That ticket may or may not get you in the door, but there are a lot of doors that are a lot easier to get in with that ticket. I do find, though, that I'm somebody who's very uncomfortable with my PhD label because it implies a level of knowledge, relative level of knowledge and expertise that I often don't have. I work every day with people who have bachelor's and master's who are way, way, way smarter than I am. And sometimes having the PhD title makes them defer to me in ways that I find not only uncomfortable, but extremely unproductive.
Thanks, Geoff. Alex, would you like to reflect on this? Master's versus PhD, what kind of ceilings?
Yeah, so I had actually, I had said that I realized I needed a PhD for the job that I want. I actually, it turns out the job I have was a master's preferred, was on the job description. So I didn't even need a master's. But I think having a PhD got, like Geoff was just saying, kind of pushed me through the door. That being said, I think my boss, or I know my boss, would have hired someone with a master's. I did get, or was able to negotiate a much higher salary having a PhD. Now, like I said, I'm not in a scientist position. So in the Nature Conservancy New York, all of our scientists have PhDs. So if they're hired for like a wetland scientist, a marine scientist, those jobs generally have the PhD requirement. In terms of like an upward trajectory, though, I think if you got in the door in the Nature Conservancy New York, at least, with a master's degree, there's a lot of room for movement. I'm stationed on Long Island. We have a huge staff. Most people keep their jobs forever. So there's not a lot of vertical movement if you come in. So if you came in with a master's and wanted to work up to some kind of different leadership position, it might be a long time till you get that job unless you're willing to move. So if you're willing to move to a different geography, there's a lot of room for like diagonal movement, I guess you could call it. So yeah, it depends. If you want to do the science research specific work, gonna need a PhD. Otherwise, there's a lot of manager type jobs, leadership type jobs where you could have a master's. And I will actually say my PhD almost may have disqualified me for this job. So I know my supervisor, the person who was also interviewing me at the time, his biggest concern was that I was not going to stay in this job. He thought I was trying to use it as a stepping stone to get into the organization. And it took, I know that was his biggest fear. He was still going to offer me the position, but we had to work quite a bit, like my first month here, on me being like, I don't plan on going anywhere. Like I want this job for the foreseeable future. I'll eventually move on, but I'm not going to just jump out of it. So there's actually some challenges for those of you working on your PhD. Also, if you end up wanting a managerial type role, you might have to do some convincing that you do want this as a long-term position, and also that you're okay giving up some of the research. You're going to let other people do that work, and you're just going to be the one overseeing it. So that's on the flip side. If you have the PhD and want a managerial position, something to think about.
Thank you.
Maybe build on that from the TNC perspective and from a global perspective. And this is an issue I struggled with quite a bit. Because, you do want to be able to move up. And it was interesting that, so at TNC, there's about 4,000-ish staff. Most of the time I was there, about 3,000 in applied conservation, many of whom have a scientific background. But like Alex says, they're out with chainsaws, communities. There's only about 250 people in the science family across the globe. And of those, only about 100 or so had PhDs. And of those, even of that 250, I think only maybe 20% are sort of like full-time research production. Many of them are doing research, but still mostly applied. So if you think of it like pumping up publications, you have very few people at TNC who are actually doing a lot of that. So as a result, I think people would often assume I have a PhD. I had to correct people often and say I'm not Dr. Fisher, I'm Mr. Fisher, or just John. And I think at NGOs, unlike the government, much more important to advance and to get a job and to go up is it more your communication skills and your relationship building skills. NGOs are extremely relationship based, and so it's the schmoozing, it's the networking, it's the communicating, it's being able to apply science and give straight answers. And so that's where, again, people would, it's embarrassing, like Geoff is a soil scientist, like with my Soils 101, I would sometimes be the soil science expert in the room. And that's depressing, but like that was enough. Like that, knowing what tilth meant, like to them was like equivalent to having a soil PhD. So it's not to say there isn't a real difference, but the only place where it really did become important is if you want to be sort of top management. So lead scientist, there's like 10 or so lead scientists and a chief scientist, all but 2, I think, have PhDs. And then the ones who don't, again, it's because they're exceptional networkers. It's because they're exceptionally good at the application of science as opposed to the production of research.
Thanks for adding that, John. Nora and Jake, do you have anything to add to what the others have said? I'm starting to think maybe we should move down some of the other questions. Unmute yourselves if you feel, you know.
You can go right ahead, Jen.
Sure. One quick thing to add to for a federal perspective. I would say the main difference is like what a lot of other people said, responsibility, but also starting salary. And I would say that we have, at least within our group at the U.S. Geological Survey, we have quite a few opportunities to move up in salary and responsibility, even within masters. And some of those are programs that you can opt into. One is where you're evaluated based on your research, which is something that I would most likely go into because I primarily do research products. But another one is where you're primarily evaluated either on equipment design, which is maybe a little bit outdated, but more and more often now it's on software design or software development. And since our group is competing with a lot of big tech companies to recruit some of these people out of IT, we have to have some sort of thing, some incentive to retain those people, because otherwise they can make oodles and oodles of money in the private industry. And so that's one way that you can still advance without a PhD. That's it.
Thanks. Kristen?
Sure. So I'll start going through some more of these questions. So another one that's got a lot of upvotes from Brian is about skills. So some of you guys have talked a bit about the skills that have helped you. Maybe there's a few of you that have a bit more to add about what are some of the skills that really did help you in grad school to move on to a non-academic career? And maybe what are some of the skills you wish you had learned or been able to practice that you could recommend for people that are still in grad school?
I'm happy to take that one.
Great.
So in terms of skills, I think that sometimes in graduate school, we don't put enough emphasis on the soft skills of what some of the folks on this panel were mentioning around like the power of networking, the power of communication, which I think as I look across kind of the roles in my team and in the teams that I work with, outreach and communication are just a function of pretty much everyone's job these days, no matter what you do. I think in terms of career advancement, this was called out kind of on the NGO side of things, but I think it's critical across the board. You need to be able to network, you need to be able to build relationships. So taking advantage of opportunities to really strengthen those soft skills. I would also say, like, along the communication vein, public speaking is really a critical skill that you need to, for some people, it is like their worst nightmare, but I really encourage you to just get over that hurdle and get yourself in front of people, presenting your work whenever you can to make yourself relevant and to make yourself an engaging storyteller and communicator. And skills that I wish that I had, I definitely wish that I had GIS skills. I have none. I'm sure that most of you probably do. But I have like total GIS envy of like everyone on my team, because it's just not something that I have. And it's an effective tool on the science and management side of things, but it's also incredibly effective on the storytelling end of things. So that's just my input on that question.
Can I just add one thing to what Nora said? So as an introvert, it is extremely difficult to harness those skills, and they do take a lot out of you. But I will say that similar to Alex, working as a manager now and managing people and being able to facilitate and act on your scientist's behalf, you must get over that, even if it is draining in every way, shape, or form. And all you do on the weekend is go for a hike and hide in a corner to recharge. You have to figure out some way to cope and deal with that. So I'll just say it is extremely difficult for me personally to do, but know that it is something that that I work on daily.
Would any of the other panelists like to touch on skills you were glad that you did learn, or skills you wish you had learned in grad school for your ultimate careers?
Just a quick comment. It's not always grad school. I actually learned a lot more at Swarthmore. Thanks, Alex, for going there and teaching for a year. A lot more skills there that I use now today. I use knowledge from graduate school, but a lot of the skills and sort of background, context, and perspective came out of that liberal arts education. Now, if I hadn't had the grad school and learned the technical knowledge of a soil scientist, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. But don't discount what you've already learned. Learned a lot. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I mean, I learned a lot just in I've worked a lot of jobs, like working at bakeries and movie theaters and in food courts, that are very important to me today, because one thing that's been really hard in this transition from like a tenure track type position or thinking in those terms to where I am now is I'm now within a hierarchy. So like I have a supervisor I have to report to. I wouldn't speak to anyone for weeks or months at a time in grad school. No one knew what I was doing or cared. Like I have to report to someone, and I also am supervising people, some of which have been in this organization for 30 years, and I've been here for 8 months. So that's been one of my biggest challenges, is just learning how to manage people and also work across quote unquote borders. So I work with a lot of people of all varying perspectives, and I'm coming from Maryland and then Swarthmore, highly progressive liberal institutions. And you know, a big part of what I do now, part of the year, is manage our hunting program. And so I'm working and living day to day with hundreds of hunters and people who have very different perspectives and political beliefs than I do. And it's been a learning experience. And it's been really fantastic to be able to work towards a similar goal of conservation with people from different backgrounds, but it's certainly had its challenges. And some days I just feel like I can't do another day of this and I need a little break. But just starting to work with people outside of the academic bubble, I think, is really enlightening, and just a reminder like the general public does not look like your grad school cohort.
Alex, that's excellent. And you pretty much queued up the next big question that a lot of the students are interested in. And I see this, you know, in my own academic setting here at UCSB. The question is, as a graduate student, the majority of my current mentors have only had experience in academia, and I feel it's hard for them to provide advice on pursuing careers outside of academia. So, and I will insert, besides career panel webinars, how does one become aware of positions, career paths outside academia? Do you have any advice for current students in terms of making the connections that may help find or land possible future jobs outside academia? So this is a really big question. It is a typical problem that I hear a lot in academia, which is, you know, my advisors are great, but not at anything other than putting me straight into a professor position. So do folks on the panel have either specific sorts of resources or general sort of advice to students on how do you get out of the, I'm not going to say ivory tower, but, you know, how do you get out of the academic setting to look to see even what's out there? And I'm just going to actually start turning it over to you guys to speak up when you want to.
I'm happy to start again. Sorry, just jumping in.
Yeah, that's great, Nora. Thank you.
I think that first, I think it's really important to have just kind of that North Star, and like have a sense of like where you think you want to be. And then something that one of my mentors, and I totally share this experience, that looking to all of your mentors in academia, they all have PhDs, they all follow that tenure track route, like that's the goal. But something that one of my mentors did share with me was like, find a handful of people who have the roles that you think could be your dream job, and then go and talk to them. And I would really encourage you to do that, whether it's someone on this panel or someone, you know, within your immediate network, or even if you're just like Googling around and clicking around organizations. You are uniquely positioned as a student at this time in your life to cold call people and have them respond well to you. I never say no to students ever, no matter how busy I am, because I know what it means to have someone who's, you know, walk that path ahead of you, take 10 minutes or, you know, however long to just share with you that how I got their story. So, you know, be a little tenacious, go ahead and like, you know, do some research, dip into your networks and talk to, you know, set yourself a goal of talking to 10 people, doing these like informational interviews, right? Like folks know what those are, and they'll be receptive to doing that with you.
Thanks, Nora. John, I'm going to put you on the hot seat for a minute because there's a specific question to you. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, the specific question was for Jake. Sorry, Jake, I'm going to put John, you're off the hot seat. Jake, you're on the hot seat. That relates to this broader question. So the question for you, Jake, in this idea of how do you find out about things outside of academia, jobs, the question was specifically, how did you write your fellowship to USGS? Did you have someone in the agency developing the project with you? And how did that work? But also, in light of this first broader question, how did you even find out about it in the first place?
Yeah, so I had known this person through networking and through my PhD advisor. And my advice for how to find positions outside of academia was going to be like reading literature. And if you note somebody that does work and you want a research position, if you note somebody that does work at a, you know, a non-academic career path, like just reach out to them and email them and say, hey, I really liked reading your paper, you know, and that starts a conversation. And that's how I got to know a lot of the people I know today. The fellowship, my initial fellowship was the NSF fellowship that I had, I think, learned through a website, maybe it was Cornell's website or something like that. And I reached out to this contact at the USGS and just asked if we'd write a fellowship with me. And so that's how that got it started.
Maybe I could add a bit. It's right. So I think finding jobs is actually not that hard. I mean, there's the big ones. There's, you know, Glassdoor, there's Monster, there's Screen Jobs and Idealist, and then there's the individual organizations is often the best place to find it. I think where people struggle more is on actually getting the job. And so the best advice I'll give you is not just finding people who have the job you want, but find people who have hired for a lot of jobs and have them brutally revise your cover letter and your resume, because it's going to be probably awful. The things that are favored in academia tend to be disfavored in NGO jobs, at least. So length, completeness, kind of self-promotion tend to make it really hard for you to get in the door. And kind of like Alex said, people might say, oh, you're some like ivory tower, you think you're too smart. And not that you can't make it an asset, but I think that's something that is really, really helpful. And university career centers are a good place to start. I went from having a really awful resume to a, you know, decent resume just with like a, you know, grad level career center, but it didn't really get better until I'd done the hiring. I knew the kind of questions people would ask. And then I guess the last thing is when you're applying for organization, really do some research on that org and flatter them. So if you're applying for a job at, you know, WRI, and you know that the reason that the way they think of themselves is like this brilliant think tank that, you know, does big influence. And if you're working with TNC and it's the mix of science on the ground conservation, figure out what, or if it's a federal agency, figure out what they think is special about themselves and speak to how that fits into your vision, assuming it does.
I'll also just add real quick, in addition to that, do a mock interview. Get some friends together and put yourself on the hot seat, because again, everybody gets stage fright, and you don't want to get stage fright when it counts. So get it over with your friends.
Thank you, Karen. And while we've moved sort of into some of the more nitty gritty, let's take on another question that's further down the list. And we can come back to the broader issue of where do you find opportunities outside academia? Mary Wright asks, how early can you typically apply for a job? I'm seeing some great job postings, but I'm not expecting to finish my PhD for another year. You all have had many dream jobs as you've moved along, and you've all done lots of different things, many of which you had to apply for. Do you have a sense for timing where you know, some of you had to create your own job opportunities? Maybe the timing is different than a a job ad with a hard close date, but if you could reflect on that, that'd be great.
I'll just jump in and say that with the state of California, sometimes just with the federal government too, sometimes it's difficult to be super flexible and give you the time that it would take for you to finish. So for me personally, I would say a year is too soon. A month or two, a quarter, that's better. Because we know at that point the majority of your writing is done. You've talked with, everybody. You've probably given, all of your exams. But getting closer, in order to give you the flexibility, I have given folks the opportunity to work part-time for about 2 to 3 months and then come on fully once they finish their PhDs. I actually have one person who's about to start and she's about a month away from getting. But that being said, it's incredibly difficult to set it aside and then start again. So just finish. It's incredibly important to finish what you started and do what you say you're going to do, because that will come through with all of the projects that you have, and your commitment to actually getting the work done.
Yeah.
Geoff?
Just yeah, 2 additional thoughts, and I totally agree with everything that Karen just said. One is, do keep an eye out for postdoctoral fellowship deadlines, because that can actually be a stepping stone to some of these others. In fact, it was for me. I had a NIFA or CSRE's postdoctoral fellowship, because it gives you a little bit of flexibility, and those deadlines come up, and they only come up once a year. And so if you're going to get on that, you need to get into those. The other thing is, I think, just be super transparent about stating uncertainty, even in your letter, about when you expect to finish, because there's nothing more frustrating, and you don't want to burn any bridges for a job you may want to apply for a year later by sort of implying that, oh yeah, I'm going to finish, but I haven't talked to my advisor yet, and that kind of thing. So transparency is huge.
Yeah, and so I will add, like I started applying for the visiting assistant professor position early in what was my 5th year of grad school, and because I got it, that pushed me to finish that year. Otherwise, maybe I wouldn't have. So it gave me something to work towards, and knowing that, well, and also seeing the salary that they offered me compared to my grad student salary was enough to get me out of there immediately. It was actually livable, so that was a really great thing to look forward to for me and my family. And then with my current job, they didn't want to wait for me to be done with a year of teaching, but I just kind of, once we got through the process and I knew they had selected me and I got the offer letter, that's when kind of negotiation started. And I would encourage you all to negotiate when you land a job within reason, like read up on how to negotiate with a job offer. But that was the point when I said, by the way, like, I really need to finish out this academic year. I can't just leave my class halfway through. I didn't want to burn bridges, but I was open with Swarthmore that I was going to probably end my position a year early if they knew I wanted a full-time permanent job, and they were accepting of that and supportive. And the job that I'm currently in waited several months for me to show up. And I'd also encourage you, if you could negotiate for this, give yourself a month off, especially if you're moving somewhere or if you have a family or not. Like I moved here and took a whole month, just like let my family get used to the place, set up our home. And I'm so grateful that I did, because everything in me wanted to start immediately, because I was so scared that I'd like lose the job or something. But no, out in the real world, like, people are aware that you're coming into things in different situations, and many people are willing to work with you as long as you're open and honest.
Great, thanks. There's a great question from Mary Wright, but I want to save time, and we'll end on that, which is, what are your insights on the job prospects with all that's going on in the world right now? Let's hold that question till we end. And another question that I think many of you will have insights on, this comes from anonymous attendee. I'm finishing up my PhD, but I have no idea what I want to pursue, and I still feel like I have a lot of skills to develop. Do you have thoughts on how feasible it is to pursue short-term positions, for example, 3 weeks or 6 months, just to explore other careers, sort of to figure out what we want to do? Would that have been a possibility in your current or your past jobs or companies? So, you know, exploring with short-term sorts of positions. Good, bad, possible, impossible? And I'll turn it to any of you.
I'd say from a hiring manager perspective, you just want to be careful about, especially after completing an advanced degree, you want to be careful about having your resume look like a series of, like, you know, that you jumped around and for all these snippets of time. I think it's actually really difficult to make a manager understand why that you're like so interested in this, you know, this next step that you're applying for, but you have seemingly like jumped around in the interim. So I would definitely encourage you to be as intentional as possible. I would think that a 6 to 12 month term position where you could really develop some of those skills that you are feeling like you're lacking, or refine your interests. I would encourage you to do that instead of like a 3-month opportunity, but others may disagree.
I think that's right. I think if you're looking at 6 to 12 months is, I think, usually where people don't get too frustrated, just because it takes me on average 3 to 6 months to hire somebody. So then if you're spitting out that fast, it's not great. I think the best way to do that within an organization is sort of internal fellowships or stretch assignments. So at TNC, there's a program called the Global Coda Fellowship, where you can, it's like I said, it can be anywhere from weeks to months to sometimes a year. It's, you know, your host program pays your salary, the other program pays your travel. And so it's meant to build and enhance skills and to try on different things. Often at organizations, there's some professional development allocation, both for time and money. So you can say, I don't have a finance background, but I really want to work on finance, or I want to work on grant writing, and can I shadow somebody? And a lot of it is really just being willing to do some grunt work and kind of some self-education to be able to make yourself useful. I think the one thing that people often make the mistake of is they say, hey, I want to do this thing because I want you to train me to do something, and I'm going to leave. So like I've had a lot of volunteers approach me to say, hey, can you teach me remote sensing? And I'll leave. I'll say, no. Now, if you want to sit in the lab and teach yourself and ask me if questions, and if you want to produce a paper with me, then absolutely. But I need you to be here for 6 months. I need to know you're going to both be self-motivated, and you'll ask me only when you need to, not all the time. So I think that's the biggest thing for me, is just finding ways to be useful, be humble about it, and ask, you know, how you can grow.
Super. Kristen, I've been picking all the questions. Would you like to go next?
Sure. I've just been reading through this large list to try to find something that's applicable. So I think something that we're getting at, but could maybe use a little more discussion right now, just because there's so much anxiety and people are feeling very isolated. Are there additional thoughts that you guys have, or those of you who haven't mentioned them already, on how do you network when everything is virtual? What has been working for you guys, or what have you seen that, you know, could be working for folks starting out? How do they reach out for advice, and what kind of skills could they potentially build in the current environment that might help them get to where you guys are eventually?
So I'll just say very briefly, this is strange, and everybody knows that it's strange. So take this opportunity, again, to reiterate what Nora said, the soft skills are the thing that pushes you forward now with everything. So you can facilitate meetings, you can be a leader in whatever capacity that you're in, but being able to flex those leadership skills and the soft skills any way that you can in this environment, whether that be through, you know, taking charge of, you know, leading a paper or facilitating meetings or whatever, if you can show that you took the lead and that you helped negotiate to consensus or a great end product, that's going to sell you in ways that just having a technical background won't.
Yeah, I think it's okay right now also if you just need to take a break or like you're not going to be super productive or building your resume. If you are looking for something to do, I mean, putting together some of those materials, maybe now is the time to focus on that. So clean up your resume or CV, or, you know, if you're thinking of going for non-tenure focused positions, resume is the thing you need, not a CV. So it's a lot of work to get that down to a 1 to 2 page document. If you don't have a professional website, now might be the time to put one of those together. I'm always impressed and happy when any job applicants have that, along with something like maybe a writing sample or whatever it is that you want to show off to a future employee. So if those are the kinds of things you want to work on now, great. But like, I wouldn't bat an eye if I saw someone with like a gap right now in their productivity, or if they said, yeah, I helped put together face masks for a while. I'd be like, cool, that's great. You know, like it's all okay right now. You don't have to be productive. I think that's totally fair and expected.
So I would just counter that in that I am a highly competitive person, and the job market is only going to Jen probably knows that. The job market is not going to get any easier after COVID-19, right? Like we all know that economic slowdown is happening. It's here. It's going to be around. That makes job prospects difficult across most sectors, but particularly in science and conservation. So I would really encourage you, if you're in a position where you don't have like 100 million other demands on your time, to really harness the moment here, and, you know, polish your resume, be proactive about reaching out to people. There are going to be, I used to keep on my whiteboard when I was a kid, like while you were sleeping, I was training. There are going to be a lot of people sitting on their heels right now. Like, you don't have to be that person. Take advantage of, you know, creating these opportunities out of this situation.
And I think related to that, definitely pick your networks and your social networking very, very carefully. We're all at different stages. We're all adjusting this in different ways. People get frustrated. There's always going to be somebody reading your resume who either is having or had a much tougher time than you're having. So, and I think we all have our families. I have family at lower levels in the restaurant industry who are my age and literally trying to figure out how they're going to survive when they're supposed to be retiring in a few years. It's really tempting to vent on social networks. It's appropriate to vent. Don't do it electronically if you can avoid it, because these things will come up, and they are actually, for better or for worse, good indicators. So we all get into bad headspaces. Get it, totally. Isolate that bad headspace with those that are not going to repeat it online.
Thanks, Geoff. Yeah, and I think, you know, really having a particular community, whether it's virtual or in person, that you can have that safe space for, I think is good in those cases. A somewhat related question I saw from Kai is about job security. So since we're, you know, a lot of folks are thinking about where are they going to find their next job, if they're looking at either government agencies or NGOs, can a couple of you guys give perspective on what the job security is like? What happens once you do get a position there? What's the mobility like?
I can touch on that a little bit. So this is something I didn't know going into my current position, but at least at US Geological Survey, most people are hired on as temporary positions, which is like a 4-year recurring position. But typically that transitions into a permanent position, which is pretty much equivalent to tenure track. So it's really hard to get fired from that position, and job security is very high. That's attractive and is a way to recruit a lot of people to a federal position. Also, another thing about security is that there's good benefits, and so you can think of security and, like, you know, health benefits or other stuff like that. Like, that's covered at places like the federal government.
I think generally the government's a lot more stable. I mean, NGOs, you have both economic downturns. So like at TNC 2008, when the economy tanked, we lost about between a quarter and a third of our scientists. So some programs were shut down entirely. Some like Mexico lost 2/3 their scientists. And that was just because we didn't have money coming in. I think it also depends a lot. So, you know, Alex coming from a state program, they tend to, like I said, have more longevity, more stability. The central programs, there tends to be more churn. But most NGOs are at-will employers, which means your employment can end at any time with no reason and you have no recourse. That's not the typical thing. They're often still kind of conflict averse and squishy, and people who are underperformers can stay for longer. But that means when there's an excuse, when there's an economic downturn or something, there definitely can be a purge. So you just got to expect, I mean, it's all mostly soft money in NGOs, right? So it's a little bit harder to plan for the long term, but it also means you can also move into different jobs. Even if your job ends, if you're good and you're well-liked, people will make room for you.
I could share a little bit of what the Nature Conservancy in New York is kind of dealing with at the moment. So yeah, one of my big concerns of getting a job with an NGO was like job stability, and what if a recession comes and just a few months in, here we are, the huge economic downturn. So there will likely be hiring freezes. We're not there yet, but everything we're spending money on right now needs to be reapproved. It was all approved to be in a budget in the first place. Now it needs to be reapproved. And the reality is that donations to NGOs follows the stock market. So there's been a downturn, and there's going to be a lasting impact for a few years. And that's not just for hiring, but also if you get hired with the Nature Conservancy in New York right now, what you're doing and what you have the ability to do is going to look a lot different than what you would have been doing 1 year ago when we were or just a few months ago when we were at an all-time high in terms of donation support and the economy in terms of the market, at least. So that's a little bit, I guess, to think about. Also, just there's a lot of uncertainty right now. It's like people who already were in the hiring process. It's unclear if, you know, we're going to move forward with all the new hires, and there's just, I think you're going to have a lot of patience on your end as the applicant with employers right now, and just realize a lot of us hiring managers don't really have control over what final decisions are being made. So be patient and cast your net wide, I think would be my suggestion.
So we're coming to the end of our time now. We have so many excellent questions that some we touched on, some we really didn't even touch on. They're still in the question and answer bar. Two things. One is, Kristen, do you want to mention then how we're going to deal with these unanswered questions? You just made a doc, and we're going to share emails. And then after Kristen is through, I just want to have, you know, we can go over, hopefully everyone can stay for another just 5 minutes, any final thoughts that our panelists have. So Kristen, maybe describe how we're going to deal with these.
Yeah, so we don't want to leave so many questions hanging because they're all wonderful and important. So I've made a Google Doc and shared the link in the chat window. It should be viewable by everyone. You can only make comments on it. I just wanted to make sure no one accidentally deletes anything. So after this is all over, our panelists will have a chance to go in and answer the questions that are relevant to them, so you can get some answers, and I'll check in and follow up with that. And we'll make their emails available, but just be mindful of, you know, when you reach out, consider everyone's time.
And so before thanking our amazing panel, do you all have any final thoughts that you really want to touch on, or advice to leave these hungry students with?
I have one bit of advice that I don't think is talked about often enough, and that has to do with compensation, not just salary, but also benefits. So as a grad student, I had no idea what my worth was, and didn't realize how underpaid I was and how I was going down a path towards being underpaid for a very long time. And so I just urge you to, what you think your value is, it's probably higher. So really do some research into different salaries, and know that you have a lot of skills and a lot to offer. And you should have full benefits in whatever job you get. You should have health insurance and a retirement package and a decent livable salary. So just start there, and don't sell yourself short in terms of compensation.
I would follow up on that, and I very much agree. I never thought that I would have the salary that I have today. I'm still not sure, actually, in my case, that I deserve it. And the reason for that is I'm incredibly privileged. Every day I wake up and I get to do something that may actually have a positive benefit on the earth and on the people who live on it. And starting with that gratitude makes it so much easier for me to navigate the days. And I don't always do it gracefully. I'd like to say that I do. But I think recognizing that we are in this field privileged to have jobs that can and do have an impact. Now, I agree with Alex, negotiate. Definitely negotiate. If the organization can afford to pay you, they absolutely should. Also recognize that we live in communities where most people don't go to work with that privilege. Thanks.
Maybe add one. I talked to a lot of younger people that kind of have a sense of like, okay, here's where I want to be in 10 years. And I've got to work towards that. And every step has to be forwards. And you've probably heard that most of us maybe had some idea, maybe we didn't, but it was much more Brownian motion going all over the place. And so I think a lot of career progression for me has been taking this bucket of experience I've been handed and making a collage from it and continually changing that collage. So if you don't find the job you want that's exactly what you're hoping for, think about how you might put it to work. I had no interest in GIS. It was just a job. And so I found ways to make that interesting and relevant to what I do. And just be as open as possible. Most of us did not, like taking 2 or 3 years to do something that feels like a cul-de-sac will not set you down. It's a blip in the road. So as much as possible, don't stress about getting the perfect job. Find a way to make whatever job you get useful and relevant to you.
I'll just add briefly to that. Make sure that you're always doing self-reflection and getting those lessons learned. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to take a detour as long as you're learning from it. And then also, just to reiterate again, just figure out how and where you're most comfortable being a leader, because that will empower you to make decisions and move forward, learn every day, and find the position that makes you feel the most grateful and privileged.
I would add that there's a lot of different types of work that I enjoy, and I didn't realize that in grad school. And I'm only focused on one thing during grad school, but there's like a lot of things that can make me happy. And also, I think the biggest thing is working with people that are good people. And I love the team that I work with, and it's life is too short to work with crappy people, so try to avoid that.
Brian Kim, we've unmuted you.
Sweet. Hi guys, I'm Brian. I'm the chair of the grad student committee for the LTER currently. Anyways, first off, I just want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. You guys provide a lot of really cool insight and opportunities that we wouldn't necessarily hear about. And I just wanted to kind of use this platform right now to talk in person in a way, virtually, I guess, to the grad student community as a whole. The LTER network, we're spread all across the country. Like, we're in 4 different time zones. We're in so many different states, working on so many different projects. But we are a network trying to help you guys, especially the grad students. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed this career panel, and I hope you guys show up for the next 2. But on top of that, if you guys have any other ideas of things that we can do through this online platform of engaging other scientists or other researchers or other programs, please contact your site rep or contact me directly, and we would love to get other things organized.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks for the work of the grad student committee as well. So I would just like to I just can't thank our panel enough for their just incredibly valuable insights and their incredible generosity in sharing their time, especially on yet another Zooming thing that we're all doing so much of. So I really just, you know, on behalf of the graduate students, on behalf of the LTER network, Cora, Brian, Kristen, and I, thank you all so much. And I hope this was super useful for the graduate students. We'll follow up with a poll. Don't forget, everybody, we're going to have a series of questions that are going to come to your email. This was our first one of these, and so if you have suggestions for both logistics, how we ran it, as well as anything, we're looking for that kind of feedback. Kristen?
Yeah, I just echo all of that. I feel very privileged to have been able to hear from all of you today and have so many students online and early career scientists. So thank you, everyone. It's very encouraging.
And our next session will be May 22nd, where we will be assembling a panel of speakers who are working in science coordination and project management, as well as data scientists. So May 22nd, everybody.